Hi, this is Ian Berry, and with me today is my good friend and colleague Peter Milligan in the UK. G'day, Peter.
Hi, Ian. How you doing?
Excellent, excellent. We're going to have another one of our conversations today, and we're going to look at a very old subject of yin and yang, but perhaps in a different way. And Peter's going to begin and take us through some ideas that he uses with his clients. So, Peter, I'll just share the screen and bring up your slides.
Great. Thanks, Ian.
There we are.
So one of my most popular talks in recent times has been embracing change in uncertain times, and for obvious reasons, because here in the UK we've got this ongoing saga around Brexit and, should we leave the EU or not? And one of the things that I do in my talks is I bring up this particular image, and I ask people how many people are familiar with it or seen it. And of course, the majority of people have seen the image, although I'm not sure that people necessarily deeply understand what it symbolises. So what I want to introduce to people is the concept of complementary opposites, which is that we need these two apparently opposing things, and life is about living in harmony between the two of them.
Yes.
So there are all kinds of complementary opposites, and I remember when I studied anthropology alongside my psychology degree, we looked at how different cultures have this concept of opposites, and in fact that human thinking is actually constructed on this notion. We have good and bad, we have light and dark, we have masculine and feminine, and so on. And I think it's really useful to understand this, because what's happened, I think most people would agree that in recent times, things have become very, very polarized on any topic you care to talk about, where people take a hard view one way or the other. And so what I'm trying to get people to recognize is that this ancient wisdom, thousands of years old, embodied in this symbol, is something we need to reflect on, because particularly in modern Western society, we tend to think a little bit more like this, just the opposites, never shall meet. And if you go to the next slide, the thinking is a little bit more like this, where it's like, well, there's good and bad, there's like, and then the two shall never meet, and it's a war. That one wants to dominate over the other. And, you have culture wars, you have gender war, like it seemed that the masculine principle somehow seemed to dominate for a very long time. And now there's this sort of wave of feminism coming through saying, that everything that men have done is wrong and bad and evil. And, we've got a better idea. And then the pendulum's almost swinging to the other extreme, making it wrong. And I say to people, particularly here in the UK, I say, if you doubt that that's how, we think, just have a look at how our Parliament's set up. And then I show the next image, which is the House of Commons, which is very much set up. And this is kind of the original sort of, the Westminster system with your government and your opposition sitting on opposite sides. And even the language we use, I think, is really interesting, because the government, is the one that's got the majority and it was elected by the people, but the opposition sits there to criticise. And it's absolutely right to have checks and balances. I think the concept's very healthy, but it's become quite toxic. And the game, as we all know, is that when you're in government, basically the script is this, that everything that's good that's going on is because of us, and everything that's bad is because of you lot. You left us this mess. You left us this debt. You left us this. You left us that. And we're here to clean up the mess that you left. And if you got back into power, it would be a total disaster. And then when there's an election and then they swap sides, what happens is that they just swap scripts as they cross the floor. So the new government now takes the line that everything's your fault and, we're right and you're wrong, and the opposition takes the opposite view. And of course, if you've ever seen, and I think it's a bit the same in Australia, but certainly here in prime minister's question times, and they're just, you know, yelling and jeering and carrying on at each other, just making lots of noise. And you think,
stuff that wouldn't be allowed in the local schoolyard.
Exactly. It's yeah, exactly. So this notion of, you know, that one's right and one's wrong is unhealthy. And it's not to say that we should all think the same. Far from it. It's actually the diversity of thought, the diversity of ideas is what we seek to find the best of both.
Yes.
So in my talks, I go from this slide back to the yin-yang symbol, and I talk about, if you go forward again.
Go forward again.
Yeah. So I talk about the complementary opposites concept, and one of the opposites, complementary opposites that is worth exploring is order and chaos. And we might take a view that one is superior to the other, but actually they both play a part. And I'm often talking to business people, so I say, you know, when you start up a business on day one, you know, what is it more like? Is it more like order or chaos? And people generally agree it's more like chaos, because you've got a bunch of people sitting around, they're saying, right, we've got all these ideas, we've got all this energy, you know, people love it, you know, it's exciting, but there's no structure really. We haven't decided who's going to be responsible for sales and marketing and production and all of those things. There's a hell of a lot to work out. And if you're building a business and you want your business to be scalable and perhaps saleable, you need to start creating structure. You need process. If you want to open up in a new market or a new region or a new country, you have to take what's made you successful and be able to replicate it. You need procedures and processes and policies and all of that kind of stuff. Now, that's all good. But what can happen is, and you know, we're seeing it going on, organizations, businesses are dying because they're unable to adapt. They're unable to innovate because they become ossified by too much structure, too much bureaucracy, too much red tape. And when there's change going on, their capacity to adapt quickly is lost. So that's where we need to find a healthy balance between the two.
I think you called it harmony before, which is a word that I very much identify, because I call it the relationship harmony point between these two opposites.
Yeah, exactly. So you need to find this nice way of flowing between. And I think the symbol is very powerful, because the black dot in the middle of the white represents the potential for the opposite, and the white dot in the middle of the black represents the potential for the opposite, and they're always there. When you have a lot of order, the potential for chaos is always there. And equally, when you have chaos, within that, the potential for order is there. And I've often said that great leaders are people who bring order to chaos and chaos to order. And I've worked with many different leaders over the years, and some of them have more of a preference or a strength for one of those qualities. So where they add most value is when they bring that into an organization that needs it. So, for example, some organizations get themselves into a real mess. People don't know who's doing what. It's very chaotic and lacks enough structure and order.
Typical startup stuff.
Yeah, and that's when you need someone who's very good at thinking very clearly and dividing things up in such a way that there starts to get clarity around things and more structure and order, which is vitally needed for a phase of growth. However, sometimes organizations become quite ossified, and sometimes you need a change agent. And perhaps the leader who's been there for 20 years, it's time for them to move on, because this is how we've always done it. And the organization might be dying because of all the change going on in the world. So you bring in a leader who's got the ability to shake things up and break things up, which some people resist. They hate it because their nice structured lives are being torn apart.
Yes.
But actually what is on the other side of the chaos is a better way. And so it swings between the two, but it's this radical sort of we're right, you're wrong mindset that's incredibly toxic. And You know, we're seeing it in the political world. You know, I've grown up sort of in a family that's got, you know, different sympathies for different points of view. And, you know, when you talk about right wing and left wing, I've kind of experienced it all. And I'm really getting to a point where I see both sides have a really valid argument. And therefore, surely we've got to find a way to bring the best of both, you know, into society, into business and so on. So anyway, that's my little rant on that topic. And I think it nicely segues into the stuff that you want to share.
Yeah, exactly does. And I think it touches on another way of looking at it, which was Stephen Covey's idea of a third alternative.
Yeah.
I actually think that's one of his best books, The Third Alternative. But I began a very long time ago. Actually, my wife and I have been married 45 years, just gone our anniversary just recently.
Congratulations.
Yes, and we're still in love, which is the good news. But years ago, very early in our marriage, someone suggested to us that we needed to, in the case of our children, we needed to have a united front in front of them. Yep. And rather than have opposing views or different views, we needed to find the view that we agreed on. And that really planted a seed in me that's now become, for the last 30 years, key to my work. And it's this idea of shared view.
Actually, can I just make a comment on that before you go ahead? Maybe you can take the slide off for a second, because it's just...
back to your slide?
Yeah, that's fine. Just as just on the parenting thing, I think that there's incredible analogies around, you know, leadership and so on in the whole experience of bringing up kids. And Jane and I have always had some fairly solid common shared values, but we also have some differences, and those differences, I think, is what makes the marriage richer. And in terms of bringing up children, I think it's important to bring those differences to the table, but not to bring them into open warfare, you know, in front of the kids, because I think it creates confusion for the kids. And I've seen in other families where mum and dad have different views, and dad will take a particular view. So mum will therefore take the opposite, because what she's trying to do is bring balance, and vice versa. You know, when she takes a view, he tries to bring balance by taking the opposite view. But what the kids experience is just polarization and conflict, and it actually makes them feel more insecure. And it also gives them scope to play off one parent against the other.
Yes.
So you get the game playing. And I observed this with some friends of mine a while ago, where he was taking a really hard line with the kids, which I think was overly hard. But then mum took an overly soft line, which I think, you know, you mix it together, you know, yeah, it's probably balanced, but unfortunately what it creates is problems in the family dynamic, which is deeply dysfunctional, I guess.
Yep.
So yeah, I just wanted to add that in, because I think, you know, for those people watching or listening who are parents, you know, this is one of the things that you've got to constantly negotiate. But yeah, it leads nicely to the third way, which is, okay, bring the best of each to the table and find that appropriate point of balance, if you like.
Yes, and I've seen exactly this kind of dysfunction that you're talking about in organisations as well, of course.
Oh, yeah.
Particularly family businesses.
Oh, yeah, you get both.
But in organisations in general. And so years ago, I created this idea that we need to respect different views, but the focus has to be on ours. So yours and mine are great. We have every right to have different views.
Yep.
But in working together and collaborating together, we need to find our way, or the third way, or the third alternative, whatever you want to call it. And in the most remarkable of workplaces, at the sort of macro level, I see that there's this shared view in what I call the 7 areas of significance. So firstly, there's a shared view around reality, you know, exactly where we are. There's an agreement about the remarkable, you know, the great, the good, but also the bad and the ugly. And everyone agrees. And then there's Just one sec. I had my phone. I was expecting a call. We're supposed to be earlier, but there you go. And then secondly, we need a shared view around possibility, you know, where we can go. We need to be able to imagine what can be. And if that imagination of what can be is based on a really precise, true view of reality, then we can go places. But then we need a shared view of purpose, you know, the reason we're going to move from where we are to where we want to be. We also need a shared view about the strategy to get there.
Mm-hmm.
And then the three ones that cause all the trouble, we need to have a shared view about how we're going to execute it all and how we're going to know we're on track. I'm very much aligned with the progress principle, you know, Teresa Amberley and her husband Stephen Kramer's work, the idea that we need to make meaningful progress visible. And
okay,
then,
I'm not familiar with that, Ian.
Yeah, a great work. And I think the more meaningful progress is visible, the more people are able to see that we're on track, then the more we progress even further. And then finally, we need a shared view about culture, which I define as who and do. It's more about behaviours. It's not the words that most organisations use. It's more about the behaviours that demonstrate that those words are lived. And I think that a shared view around those behaviours underpins all the others. And so I won't go into it today, but in my book that's coming out shortly, I take a micro look at all these things to say we also need a shared view in smaller yet perhaps more significant areas than those big seven. And that's centered around the three ideas of my work and the book. That's about people feeling valued, people living values, and people delivering value. And I take a micro look at those areas. But it's all based on this fundamental concept that we need to respect different views. We need to honour different views, in fact. But the secret to collaboration and the secret to great progress is to find ours.
Yeah, and it's been interesting. I'm watching what's going on in the world and how there's this kind of, it's almost like a cognitive colonialism. It's just a term I've phrased about 3 seconds ago. This notion that the way I see the world is actually the right way. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do whatever I can to impose on your view so that you adopt my view and we call it ours.
Yes, and this is the dark side of the Twitter sphere.
The what?
The Twitter sphere.
Oh, the Twitter sphere. Yeah, well, that's a manifestation or a symptom of the mindset, really. I mean, I've been saying a lot recently that technology isn't going to fix anything. Technology is simply an amplifier. It's not good or bad. It amplifies everything about us. And so the new technological tools that are at our disposal can bring out the best and worst of us. And the worst of us is this desire to impose our view on others because we think our view is right and everyone else is wrong. And
yes.
And you know, I think it's you know, it's been around since humanity. You know, it's like the Spanish Inquisition. You know, it's like you're not allowed to think or say anything different to the standard view, and we're going to torture you or kill you because you poor misguided people, you've got it wrong, and we're doing you a favour. In fact, I heard something the other day that the people that were torturing and killing people back in the times of the Inquisitions and the witch hunts and all of that, they actually believed that they were doing something good for these people because they felt that if these people didn't hold the same view, that they would would suffer in hell forever. So they felt that they were helping these people.
That's right. I call this the disturbing nature of dogma.
Yeah, exactly.
And what I mean by that, I mean I studied theology as well as you know, and part of that journey was to get into Joseph Campbell's work and looking at the myths and so on. And of course, you know, what religion doesn't want to admit to is that it borrowed all of its ideas from pagans. And in fact, a lot of churches are built on pagan sites. But one of the interesting things, just to take one religion, Christianity, you know, the words of Jesus are about 2,000 words.
Yeah.
And they could be summed up, I think, in 2 words: love one another. So
yeah,
take that as the gospel, no pun intended. And then you look at the Vatican, the Catholic Church. They've had, I think it's 21 major conventions over 1900 years.
Yeah.
And the dogma that's become the truth, you'd need at least that major library in London near Euston Station. You'd need at least that building to put all the stuff in there. And yet that's become the thing, not the actual message of the one that it's founded on.
Yeah.
And you see this everywhere, don't you? That what's become the truth is actually someone's version of the truth. I see this in leadership so much. And in fact, I've been questioning with a lot of my clients that leadership is overrated, because what it means, and this is exactly to your point, Peter, what leadership means in many places, politics, religion, business, education, you name it, what leadership means is that you're going to do what I want you to do.
Yeah. Rather
than being a genuine way of helping you achieve what's important to you, which is what leadership should be about. What it's actually about in many places is you're going to do what I want you to do. You're going to believe what I want you to believe, etc. And so I think leadership's become overrated.
Yes, it's interesting. Or the concept of leadership needs to be updated, perhaps. That's more the point of what it is. And I've said for many years that leadership isn't a position, it's a disposition. It's a way of being. And somebody sitting on the reception desk at a company might show more leadership than the CEO in the way they operate and behave on a day-to-day basis. So, it isn't about how many people you have reporting to you or how much power you have. It's your capacity to influence and make a difference and show initiative.
Yes, yeah, absolutely right. Yeah, and so I guess I'm interested in because I think we're both coming at the same thing in a different way, but I also think that this is very important for the world right now. I've found it very fascinating to watch and listen to the New Zealand Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern.
Yeah.
Because her whole approach is exactly what we've been talking about. It's not one way or the other. It's not either or. It's very much respecting difference and coming together for a common reason or a common purpose. And she's one world leader who is really, I think, really excellent at articulating all of this. And I just wonder, can she influence some of the others? Because the Prime Minister in Australia would be the opposite of that.
Right.
I in fact am embarrassed because he's just a bully.
Mm-hmm.
He tries to bully people, and he's got a stench of self-righteousness attached to it.
Mm.
So there's no way that we can move forward with that kind of attitude, and yet just across the ditch, as we call it, we've got an exemplary example of what leadership actually is.
Yeah, and I think we have to also go beyond the sound bites and get to know a little bit more about what's behind people's thinking as well.
Which we don't get an opportunity to do we, in the modern world? I think our Prime Minister's probably a very decent human, but
Well, yeah, and I think that's the thing. I mean, it's funny because it was just yesterday I stumbled across an interview with Tony Abbott, and I know I haven't been in Australia since, I haven't lived in Australia since Tony Abbott was, Prime Minister, and a few years back, and I know at one point you'd made the comment you thought he was the worst Prime Minister ever, and that may be, but it was interesting because I thought he was a bit of a dickhead, I suppose, only from what I'd heard and seen. But I listened to an interview with him about a whole range of topics, and it was really interesting because there's a lot that I thought was very sensible and I agreed with about his views on things. And I thought, well, that's interesting because often there's more to a person than meets the eye, and I've become extremely skeptical about mainstream media because they're showing us a particular thing. They give us sound bites because that's all they can do. In a 30-minute news program, and they're covering a range of topics, they can only give us 5 minutes with about 3 sound bites from a handful of individuals. And
yes, it's very interesting. I mean, I was just going to say, I think I know some folk who know Tony Abbott personally, and they say he's a good bloke, great guy. And what I say to them is, well, he never showed it in public because he was always an attack dog.
Yeah, and okay, so you've just hit onto something there, Ian, because I think this is where the system we're living in at the moment is deeply flawed because it actually invites that behaviour. I showed the image of, the House of Commons and how the whole thing's structured and set up to play the game of government versus opposition. And it plays out in the, in the world. There's something about human beings that we...
We'll just take away our slides there and just focus on the conversation. Yep.
Yeah. There's something about us human beings that we like drama. We do. We like drama. We go to a movie or a play or a football match because we like drama. We don't know how it's going to play out. We like the villains. We like to take sides. We're just intrinsically attracted to that.
Yes. Yes.
And that's fine, for entertainment. Politics is fine for entertainment. You can watch them shouting at each other and think that's great. But really, when it comes to making decisions about, people's lives and stuff like that, we should really just leave the drama for the football field or the theatre, and the movie screens. Yeah, and then we should be running businesses and countries in a much more sensible and collaborative way. So even the media, this is where mainstream media is actually going to die, and I think it is starting to die thanks to the internet because, you get a 30-second soundbite of some person talking, and you think, right, well, that's their point of view, that's what they're about. I don't agree with it, so they're an idiot. And what you're missing is the richness and the some of the underlying assumptions and they're bringing to the table. There's no time to explore that.
No.
That's why I now spend much more time listening, whether I'm driving or washing the dishes, listening to long-form conversations between two intelligent people on important topics because you get to dive in and look at the complexity.
It's one of the reasons I continue to love reading books.
Yeah, absolutely.
For the same reason.
Yeah. So we're missing that in this modern soundbite culture. And I mean, I've said for a long time, Donald Trump is simply the embodiment of human ego. He's playing out large something that we all do. Simple points of view, just expressed, not really listening to any other point of view, not interested in subtlety or complexity. All of us like that. We like to, I don't care, just have a view. That's it. I've already made up my mind. And, he's the first, head of a country in the world to just completely spend all his time on Twitter, just making these outrageous statements, without any substance behind it, or if there is substance, we don't see it. Like you said about Tony Abbott, if he is a good guy, you never got to see it. he was just playing the attack dog.
No, and so the challenge for us, and I'm having lots of these conversations with my clients, is how do we rehumanize our workplaces and our political, structures and our societal structures. I mean, excuse me. I mean, one of the things that sort of fascinates me is that the election here in Australia, if you take the current government's viewpoint, is all about the economy.
Yeah.
And they keep talking about how they're, masters of the economy, and yet the figures tell a very different story. If you look at figures that are not put on the page by someone who's got a biased view towards the government, the pictures actually tells a very different story to what the government's portraying. But what I find interesting is this has only happened in my lifetime. I'm 65, and looking back historically, once upon a time we were a society that had an economy in it. Now we've become an economy with a society in it.
Ah, I've never thought about it like that.
And so what I keep having conversations with people about, currently about the election, let's look at the society issues, like doing something about the climate, like doing something about bullying in schools, like doing something about, some of the energy challenges we have, like, you could rattle them off. There's a lot of society issues. I mean, we have a huge domestic violence problem here in my home state of Victoria, where I think already this year, 14 women have been murdered.
What about men? How many men have been murdered?
None.
They do get murdered, though.
Not from a domestic violence point of view. There has been men murdered in gang wars, but yeah. But and this is, I mean, the numbers here are that I think it's 97% of the domestic violence incidents are committed by men. And so we've got a problem. But what do we do to address it? We try and turn it into an economic thing. So we're going to spend this, we're going to do this, we're going to invest all this money, blah blah blah. But I'm not sure that in all quarters it's actually addressing the societal issues that are the cause of it in the first place.
No, there are symptoms of a deeper problem that we're not talking about.
Yeah. So it's like the I call them the status quo sticklers. Most of them are white men of my age and older. They're hanging on to the status quo, for grim death, because that's what gave them their power. And so, we have this, what I think it's a ridiculous idea. It's called the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Well, hang on a minute. We haven't got over the dehumanization of the First Industrial Revolution. Well, we want to have another 3, 4. Now, I get the, the comparisons of the ages, but we're not addressing the dehumanization.
Mm-hmm.
And so let's call it something else. And let's get back to the real issue, which is about being better humans.
Mm-hmm.
And this whole idea of being better humans seems to be going over the heads of our political, religious, and business leaders.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so all we can do, I think, is continue to do our bit in our piece of the planet. Because what I know about my clients is that's at the heart of the conversation. How do we be better, wiser, more valuable humans?
And I think it comes back to one of our earlier conversations, Ian, about people's freedom of speech and being able to express their point of view. So I was listening to what you were saying about, these, what were you calling them? Status quo sticklers. Now, okay, so I would suggest that in saying that using a label like that, and I've done it plenty of times myself, we're in danger of actually discounting a point of view that still has some value and validity in it.
Yes.
And I think this concept of name calling, and as I say, I've done it myself plenty of times, is also dangerous, because then we're throwing babies out with bathwater. And I think, the concept of older white men who've just had power is also a narrative that's embedded in some of the kind of the feminist kind of narrative around where a lot of the problems in the world come from. And there's undoubtedly that is a factor, but what we're in danger of doing is throwing away stuff, because people's point of view has something valuable in it. There is something there that we need to still respect, understand and cherish, but it's about reforming it, isn't it? It's about
I take your point, but if you've got the white old men that I'm talking about trying to aggressively get you to toe their line, then I believe we've got to fight back in some way, not disrespectfully.
Well, I don't think it's even about fighting, because this is this whole notion of, right, they're taking that point of view. I'm going to balance it by taking the opposing point of view. So then it becomes who's right, who's going to fight, who's going to win the fight. What I'm endorsing is this concept of, underneath all of that is something important and something that needs to be thought about.
Yes.
And we're living it here in the UK with this whole Brexit debate. And look, I'm going to be more honest than I used to be. I voted for Brexit, and I felt that immediately anyone who voted for Brexit in the mainstream sort of view is you're uneducated, you're stupid, you're racist, and you've been misled and misinformed, and you're out of touch, right? They're the classic labels of those people. They want to go back to the good old days of British Empire. That's what they're harking back to. So there's this stereotype of people who voted to leave the EU, which is deeply unfair. There are people who are racist. There are people who want the good old days of empire. Yes, of course, and they would have voted Brexit. But there are lots of highly educated, non-racist, very, very positive about Europe people who voted to leave the EU. And just this morning, I saw a brilliant talk by a guy called Brendan O'Neill here in the UK. It's on YouTube. It's called The Case Against the EU, and he points out that one of the things that's happened is there's this very clever linguistic thing where they're conflating the EU with Europe. In other words, the institution that's called the EU is the same as Europe, and if you don't like the EU, you must hate Europe. And he articulated what I felt for so long, that when I came over here, I was excited about the fact that my kids could live and work in Europe, not just, hey, I love that. And so it's quite ironic that I would vote to leave the EU, which means that their opportunities to do that are going to be limited. What's that about? And it's actually more about the concern about the creation of an institution that's inherently non-democratic.
Yeah.
That power becomes centralized. And so,
but the same thing can be said, though, of the Westminster system and every political system.
And it's not.
None of our systems are democratic. I mean, here in Australia, for example, we don't get to vote for the Prime Minister. We only get to vote for parties.
Not the Prime Minister, but you get to vote for the party or members of the party, don't you?
But what if I don't want to vote for parties?
But yeah, well, exactly.
So the whole system is broken.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I totally agree with that.
And so what I do, I've been playing the Twitter sphere. I have found it hard to be consistently respectful because of some of the moronic statements that are made, and the just straight out lies that are made. But I found it interesting that there seems to be, there's still the nonsense, but there is a there is a shift towards, what I would call the sensibility, more human sort of approach. And sometimes you've got to be provocative in order to get people to listen to a different point of view.
Yeah.
And then you can go down the road for people that are willing to have a conversation. I think you and I have talked about David White's famous line so often, where, in leadership, the conversation is not about the work, the conversation is the work.
Yeah, exactly.
And the challenge, I think, is that people aren't having the conversation. They're talking about the work. It's like Brexit. Brexit wasn't about Brexit.
No.
It was about other stuff in the cloak of Brexit. That's
a whole bunch of other stuff. I mean, that's it. And a simple ballot paper, which has 2 boxes that you just choose to tick one or the other. And underneath all of that is incredible complexity. So I think in a way it's been useful, because what's happened is it's flushed up to the surface a whole lot of stuff that nobody gave a lot of thought to. And I think in that regard it's been healthy. It's just unfortunate that it's still being played out as a very binary. It's one or the other. It's black and white, and my hope is that people, more people start to think more deeply about broader issues.
I think it may lead to greater harmony. That would be my view. And I think in Australia, just looking at the political sort of angle, we've got a lot of, we could end up with 15 independents in the House of Representatives, which means they would have the balance of power. And
in the Senate or the House of Reps, or both?
Both.
Yeah.
So I actually think that's a good thing, because we'll move away from this and that and either or, and we'll move to a more, our view, a more, as you say, complementary opposites. I in fact think we should have an independent PM one day. No more party stuff, because that's all about non-complementary opposites. Yeah,
absolutely.
And that requires obviously a major shift. But I think it's not just you and me having this conversation, Peter. There's lots of other folk, and I'm very much encouraged by the amount of people that I see having these kind of conversations. And I'm also encouraged by my clients who are on this great quest to be better humans.
And so coming back to the freedom of speech thing, I think probably the thing that concerns me most is that there is this move towards shutting down opinions that don't match what people, what the mainstream thinks we should be talking about. And whether it's about race, whether it's about climate, whether it's about, whether the Holocaust was really what it was painted as by the history books, any of those things, I just think it's deeply unhealthy to shut them down, because I think those things should be up for debate, and conversation. I think when people say, well, the climate thing, it's over now. We know exactly what's going on. Anyone who thinks anything different is not allowed to speak. Or the concept of hate speech. If you criticize anything about Islam, if you criticize anything about the state of Israel or the beliefs of Jews or the beliefs of Christians, then that's classified as hate speech. Therefore, we're going to bring in legislation that says we're going to censor that, hard or soft censorship. Soft censorship is much more subtle. It's algorithms on YouTube and Google, which means that those opinions start to disappear. Like you can't even find them anymore unless you know an exact URL and link to find them.
Yes.
And I think we're going to be poorer for that, because
I agree.
Whenever I see something in the mainstream, I immediately go, right, what's the other point of view? I look for it. Recently I saw there's a meetup group online I saw called Muslims in Gloucestershire, and I thought, someone's proposing that there's not a high Muslim population in the part of the world I live in, but someone said, it'd be nice to get together with other people who are Muslims in the area. But what I found really, really interesting and attractive was that she said non-Muslims are welcome to come. along. And I'm really tempted to do that
Yeah.
because I
Well,
want to know what their views of things are, because I don't accept everything that's just painted in the media.
no, and so look, I think, and this is something that I've been really working hard on in my own sort of neighbourhood, in my own circles, because I think it's the forums. And so,
Yeah.
you know, social media is not the place to have this conversation.
280 characters doesn't do it justice.
Public rallies is not the place to have this conversation. I think we need to meet more in private until we're capable of having the conversation in public. Because right now, the majority are not capable of having a complementary opposites conversation. So we need to have forums that make that possible. And as we improve our skills, then we move into the public arena. That would be my sense.
Yeah.
Usually public rallies are organised by one side, and the other side comes to protest.
Yeah.
Well,
and then
that doesn't work.
In the streets, you get this going on.
This is
and
Paris.
I think
this is, you know, it doesn't work.
Yeah. I heard someone talking about this yesterday with the what's been going on in France, and they said it's really about our society's become quite atomized. People want to get out and connect with other people, and what they're enjoying is people from all walks of life, you know, all parts of the political spectrum, all different ethnic groups are all coming together, donning the yellow vests and kind of spending time. They're protesting about what's going on, but at the same time they're enjoying each other's company, and I think that's really exciting. And I think if we can have more of these fora where people come together with different points of view, because if we go and we hang around together with people who agree with us, that's unhealthy. I agree. I want to meet people who have different points of view. I want to understand how it is for them and say, oh, I'd never thought of it that way. And then it matures and grows my own thinking. And that's what we're kind of lacking in the mainstream at the moment.
Yeah, we are. And I think we've got to work much harder in private so that the public conversation becomes much better. Because it's really not a conversation. It's actually a one-way, you know, thing, and people are gelding
on the highway. I'm right, you're wrong. The person who shouts the loudest wins the game.
That's not a conversation.
No.
I mean, the other day I was driving up to Ballarat, which is about an hour and a half from my home, and I was listening to the radio and they have the local ABC radio guy, John Fain, who you might have heard of. He has a regular, what he calls the conversation hour.
Mm-hmm.
And on this particular day, he had some jazz musicians as guests, including the one and only James Morrison.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a big fan of James Morrison, so I stayed tuned as I was driving along. And then Morrison said something that I found fascinating. He said, if only the world was a jazz band, everything would be cool.
Now that's so funny you said that, because literally in the last 2 or 3 days, I read something or heard something where someone used a similar analogy, that it's like we're being required to play sheet music following a very clear structure rather than playing jazz together.
Well, he went on to say that the only way, because he was playing in Melbourne that night with Dizzy Gillespie and a few other luminaries.
Yeah.
And they don't have sheet music.
No.
He said the only way that we can play together successfully is to really listen and then improvise.
Yeah.
And I thought, what a perfect metaphor for a true conversation.
Yeah, definitely. And you don't know exactly where it's going to go. It has to follow basic rules and structures. I mean, music, you have to understand the structure of music. But once you've done that, then that's when you get to play, and you get to create and innovate and enjoy time with others. So, yeah, it's a very powerful metaphor. Probably a good place to end this conversation.
I think you're right. So what I want, Peter, is more jazz band conversations.
Yeah, I love it. Bring it on. Let's do it.
And then eventually, when we get good at it, we'll move out into the audience.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. No, that's what it's all about. Brilliant. Thanks, Ian.
You're welcome. I'll just press recording, Peter, and then we'll do our goodbyes, but I'll just stop the recording. Thank you, folks, for listening.